Today on the Don't Forget to Set Your Clock Ahead an Hour Says podcast, I will be comparing M4a to MP3 files to see which one sounds better. I'll be comparing 4 lavalier microphones, sharing why I live a relatively strict life, and other stuff too, so go ahead and stick around. We are getting into the weeds today because I didn't see any news that I found interesting, so I figured, hey, let's go ahead and film some stuff that I have been putting off for a while. First up, I want to compare M4a to MP3 files to see which one actually sounds better. I understand this has already been determined and decided. M4a does sound better than MP3. The compression of M4a is better than MP3. That's fine. Theoretically, that's fine, but I want to actually hear it. So I recorded some samples, I exported some audio in a bunch of different formats at a bunch of different bit rates. Is that what it would be called? And we're going to listen to them. First up, here is a sample podcast I made. It is 20 seconds long, about 12 seconds of spoken word, and then 8 seconds of music. So let's go ahead and hear that lossless sample right now. Here is just a quick spoken word sample for this demo podcast so we can hear how the different encoding methods and formats impact spoken word. And now let's hear a little bit of music. Now that you've heard the lossless version, let's jump to the comparison section where I exported a portion of that audio at a bunch of different bit rates for MP3 and M4a, 320, 192, 128, and 64 kilobits per second stereo. I will play M4a, MP3, M4a, MP3, so on and so forth, so you can hear the difference. Let's jump to that right now. Here is just a quick spoken word sample for this demo podcast. Here is just a quick spoken word sample for this demo podcast. Here is just a quick spoken word sample for this demo podcast. Here is just a quick spoken word sample for this demo podcast. Here is just a quick spoken word sample for this demo podcast. Here is just a quick spoken word sample for this demo podcast. Here is just a quick spoken word sample for this demo podcast. Here is just a quick spoken word sample for this demo podcast. Now onto the most dull portion of this test, the null test. I am going to play the entirety of each of those samples in each format at each bit rate, and I have inverted the phase of those samples, and I am playing it against the original lossless file. This is going to output only the data that is lost due to compression. This is going to take a while, so if you want to skip this incredibly dull, or should I say null, area, I will have a timestamp. I should be flogged for that. I'm not Tom Buck. I can't pull it off. I will have a timestamp so you can skip ahead. Here's just a quick spoken word sample for this demo podcast so we can hear how the different encoding methods and formats impact spoken word. And now let's hear a little bit of music. Here is just a quick spoken word sample for this demo podcast so we can hear how the different encoding methods and formats impact spoken word. And now let's hear a little bit of music. Here is just a quick spoken word sample for this demo podcast so we can hear how the different encoding methods and formats impact spoken word. And now let's hear a little bit of music. Here is just a quick spoken word sample for this demo podcast so we can hear how the different encoding methods and formats impact spoken word. And now let's hear a little bit of music. Before I share my thoughts on the findings of this brief test, I want to share some anecdotal information. I used to release this podcast as an M4a file, and when I did that, I would encode it at 128 kilobits per second stereo, but when I wanted to embed or burn in ID3 tags to my audio file, I couldn't do that with M4a, so I had to switch over to MP3. In order to get the same audio quality, at least to my ears, I had to bump up the encoding from 128 to 160 kilobits per second to avoid any kind of really lossy artifacts. So I had to increase the encoding with MP3 to get the same audio quality that I was getting out of M4a. With that being said, let's jump to what I heard with this test. And with M4a compression, I heard us losing information across the entire frequency range, but it seemed to be kind of sporadic. It wasn't easy to pinpoint exactly what was going to be lost. With MP3, though, it seemed to be a lot more consistent across the entire frequency range, especially in the higher frequencies. However, with M4a, I did notice a roll-off in the high frequencies once we started getting down to 192 kilobits per second. At that bit rate, I think we were rolling off above 18 kilohertz. At 128 kilobits per second, we were down to maybe 16, 17 kilohertz. And then when we jumped down to 64 kilobits per second, which is terrible, we were down to maybe 13 kilohertz. But I do want to point out that forced the audio file's sample rate to jump down to 32 kilohertz as opposed to 48 kilohertz. So it's no surprise that we got that roll-off. And even though we are losing some high-end information due to that roll-off, I still think the M4a sounds a little bit better at 128 kilobits per second and higher because to my ears there was less artifacting. We aren't getting the full frequency range because I was seeing a roll-off, but what was still there sounded less artifacty and much more listenable. Maybe that's not fair. I don't think I should say much more listenable because both of them are fine at 128. At 192, they are fairly comparable. At 320, they are both fairly comparable and pretty easy to listen to. I don't think anybody is really going to complain about a 320 kilobits per second M4a or MP3. But then we get to the file size of these formats, and I read that M4a ought to be smaller, but I found that in every single bit rate, it was larger. For 1 minute of audio at 320 kilobits per second, M4a was 2.6 megabytes, while MP3 is 2.4, and then just jumping down to 64 kilobits per second, MP3 was 0.63 megabytes, and MP3 was half a megabyte. So in every single instance, M4a was larger than the MP3 file. But with internet speeds being what they are nowadays, I really doubt anybody's going to complain about the file size of your audio-only podcast, because for an hour of 320 kilobits per second M4a, you're looking at 156 megabytes. That's not a lot of information given bandwidth and speed nowadays, but I had to include the information even though I think it is irrelevant, just for the sake of being complete and just to quench my thirst for knowledge. Just so I know that M4a is technically larger if you export at the same bit rate, but if you can export at a lower bit rate for M4a, yes, you would be getting smaller file sizes with a similar audio quality to MP3. Quick tangent here, when I was exporting all of these files, I learned that I'm able to export something called a lossless M4a file, and that is super duper exciting to me because all of the high quality audio that I have uploaded to Podcastage over the last couple of years has been exported at 320 kilobits per second M4a. That is lossless, that is compressed. And the reason that I did that is my host and the built-in player do not accept and do not allow for WAV files. But if I am able to upload this lossless M4a file, now I will be publishing lossless. I am so stoked. That is going to be so exciting. I may go back and re-export all of those original files as lossless M4a and re-upload them. The file size is going to be massive compared to the M4a, but I think it's going to be worth it. And I did a null test against the original WAV file and it zeroed out. So there is no actual loss to the information. It is actually lossless. The file size just says M4a, and as long as my host doesn't freak out, you're getting lossless, baby. That is it for this test. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. What file format do you use to encode your music, to encode your podcast, to listen to stuff, M4a or MP3? Let me know in the comments down below. Now onto the second test of the episode. I want to do a quick spoken word comparison between a couple of lav mics that I've picked up over the last year or so. I'm going to be running the first 3 of them into the Zoom F2 field recorder because they are all 3.5 mil. The last lav I will be testing is running into an audio interface because it has a TA4F connector and I have a TA4F to XLR preamp. We're starting on the Rode Lavalier II. Full disclosure, this was sent to me by Rode. The lav is clipped directly to my shirt about 7 inches below my chin to hopefully avoid a bit of the chin shadow. But here is how the Rode Lavalier II sounds, and I believe this costs about $100. Now I am on the Countryman B6. It is clipped in the exact same location. The cover I am using is called Clear, I think. That adds a +4 dB bump at around 15 kilohertz. And here is how this sounds. I believe this costs about $350, maybe $400. But again, running into the Zoom F2, I had to get the Sennheiser adapter or Sennheiser connector to fit on the Zoom. But there you go. That's a quick sample of the Countryman B6. Now I am on the Sanken Cos 11D PT, I think it is called. It is in the exact same position on my shirt, again running into the Zoom F2. This microphone costs, again, maybe about $400. I can't recall. I had to get this one from B&H Photo. It wasn't on Sweetwater, but that is enough talking on this. So there you go, Sanken Cos 11D, apparently a very popular lav mic. And finally, I am on the Shure TL48. What a big surprise. It's in the exact same position, but now I am running into a TA4F to XLR adapter, and that is running into the Focusrite 18i 22nd Gen. 48 volts is on, and my gain is set at about 4 o'clock or 90-ish%, recording 24-bit, 48 kilohertz. This microphone costs about $450, I think it is, and that's what you're listening to. Here is another quick sample on the Rode Lavalier II, and here is another sample of the Countryman B6 about 7 inches below my mouth. And here is another sample on the Sanken Cos 11D, 7 inches below my chin, clipped directly between my moobs. And here is the last sample on the Shure TL48, 7 inches away from my mouth, and that should conclude the comparison section. Wow, past Bandrew, thank you so much for that demo and test. That was super duper helpful. Ricky from scottishwatches.co.uk. I hope you found that useful and helpful too. There you go. I finally did it. It took me months after saying I was going to do it, but I finally did it. Let me know what you thought of those lavs in the comments down below. Did you have a favorite? Do you think one stunk? Do you think you're really getting your money's worth when you go to the higher end lavs? Or do you think you're just throwing your money down the drain? Also, when listening back to those samples, I learned something pretty darn important. I need a different recorder. That F2 is very convenient in the size. The noise performance I was not too happy with. And I shouldn't be surprised because Zoom has never been known for low noise preamps, especially in their consumer level stuff. I guess I should say only in their consumer level stuff because I don't know about their pro level stuff. I've never used it. But for their consumer level stuff, the noise floor has never been great, and this is no exception. If you have recommendations for a good tiny little portable lav recorder, 3.5mm recorder, let me know because I would love to check it out. I want something that is going to represent the mics that I'm plugging it into as best as possible, and it's not going to introduce a bunch of unnecessary noise. As far as my opinions on the lav, I am going to agree with sound speeds. The TL48 sounds incredible. It sounds really good. It had a nice amount of clarity up top, but it wasn't piercing, and then it also didn't sound weak in the bass. It didn't sound muddy, though. It's just a really good sounding lav, but it's also, I think, the most expensive one, and it doesn't have 3.5, so I had to get an expensive TA4F to XLR preamp, which just makes it more expensive, which is stinky. You can't use it with a standard 3.5mm hip pack or something, which sucks. That is it for the tests that I have been putting off. We are now jumping to what you had to say, and I have one question from Alan, not sound speeds, but Alan out of my Discord server, and he says, would having a balanced approach to food, exercise, buying stuff, etc. be mentally and physically healthier than the alternative to strict rules on abstinence? If one has a yearly budget for DVDs, for example, why would it be better to spend that amount in 10 months rather than 12 months? Alan, thank you very much for the comment and the question. I really appreciate you asking this because I find this topic to be really interesting, so it's going to be a ton of fun to dive into. Would having a balanced approach to food, exercise, and finances be mentally and physically more healthy than strict rules on abstinence? My answer is no. I don't think I would be healthier if I lived a different way, and the reason I am okay saying that is I did live a different way, and I was extremely unhealthy both physically and financially. But it comes down to you understanding yourself and making decisions on what is right for you and what is best for you. But with that being said, let's explore why I believe living strictly is healthier for me as opposed to indulging more often than I should. So why do I live with strict rules for finances, diet, and exercise? It all comes down to understanding my behavioral tendencies, understanding my personality, and learning what behavior and actions lead to negative outcomes. And over decades, I have learned that I have a very addictive personality, and that means that I have to be strict with myself, otherwise I will find myself being overindulgent. So to avoid that overindulgent behavior, some people may be able to enjoy it on occasion, but I have found that I just need to not partake in certain things. I can't have certain things around me. It is why I don't drink alcohol. It is why I no longer buy junk food, because both of those things are very easy to become overindulgent in, to binge on. Now, to be clear, I don't live a completely monastic life. I do still indulge in things that I enjoy, and when I do, it makes it all the more special. I'll get a pizza a couple of times a year. I'll get a couple pieces of candy during Halloween or during Christmas. I'll get cake for New Year's or something special like that. And when I do actually get to indulge and enjoy those items, those food items, it makes it so much more special than if I were to buy them every single month or go to the grocery store and say, hey, good job, Bandrew. You had a great job at work this week. Go ahead and get a piece of candy. If I do that every week, that's not special. But if I wait till Halloween, that makes it a lot more special. I know there are plenty of people out there who do not have to live like this to avoid overindulging. They can have a carton of ice cream in their freezer and have the self-control not to eat it in a single sitting. But I understand I am not that person, so I do not buy ice cream because I will eat it in a single sitting. But that is as far as the consumption, as far as the food. What about exercise? Why am I so consistent with walking and doing push-ups every single day? It's a very similar idea. If I choose not to walk because I don't want to, I will start to enjoy being lazy a bit too much, and then I will let the sloth take over. So I have to force myself to get up, spend an hour of my day going for a walk, take a couple of minutes every single day to do a couple of push-ups just to get that exercise in, do something that makes me a little bit uncomfortable. And I want to point out that I don't think that I'm overexerting myself or doing anything crazy by walking 4 miles a day, because I'm pretty sure that human beings have walked 4 miles a day forever. And humans just stopped doing that, at least in the West, maybe 100 years ago when automobiles started to get popular. So I don't think putting 4 miles in every single day is unhealthy. I don't think it's out of the ordinary. And I think it is a good decision for me. I also ask myself, what would I be doing with that extra hour if I did choose not to go for that walk? Would I be doing something actually productive? No. If I am being 100% honest with myself, I would be sitting on my butt, watching a TV show, watching a movie, doing something where my brain is shut off. It would be a waste of time. So at least by spending that hour doing exercise, I am benefiting from it, as opposed to just becoming a worthless sloth that is sitting on my couch. Which is okay from time to time, but I know that I enjoy that far too much. And if I start to indulge, I will be the best sloth there ever was. And then we get to finances, why I am so strict with myself with finances, and why I do no spend months. The primary purpose of these no spend months for me is to break bad habits that I see forming in terms of overspending, or maybe I am just being a bit too comfortable with spending money. I am starting to not understand the value of $1. I am not understanding how many hours it takes to earn the money to buy what I am buying. If I start to notice myself behaving that way, I know, hey, Bandrew, it's time to do a no-spend month. Now, I don't set out every single year with a set number of no-spend months that I do, because I think that might be counterproductive, because if I set an annual budget to spend X dollars in 12 months, and I knew I was going to be doing 2 no-spend months, that would lead to me spending that entire budget within 10 months and being a bit overindulgent. The goal is not to cram a year's worth of spending into a shorter time frame, into 11, 10, or 9 months. The goal is to hopefully eliminate the desire to constantly buy new stuff and hopefully break the desire to overconsume. Maybe I'm oversharing here, but when I look around my home and look at everything that I personally own, a lot of what I see is just frivolous spending. It was, oh, that sounds fun, I guess I'll buy that. That sounds fun, I guess I'll buy that. And by doing these challenges, by forcing myself to do no spend months, I am trying to alter my relationship both with finances and with things. And the reason I'm doing that is to hopefully ensure in the future that I don't find myself in a situation where I have no money and I have a bunch of crap that I don't care about, because I don't want to be that dude. It's a story as old as time. You hear it nonstop. This person earned some money, they spent everything, they didn't save a penny, and now they're broke. I don't want that to be me. So I am trying to understand my behavior and break bad habits with these challenges. But then I have a couple of secret motives on why I live so strictly, why I live a relatively monastic life. And number one is I frequently think back to my grandparents and my great-grandparents, and I think about what it was like when they grew up. I think about what they went through, and I think about how they thrived, and every single one of them lived incredibly frugally. Of course they had to. It was out of necessity because they lived through multiple world wars and they lived through the Great Depression, so you really couldn't afford not to be frugal. But I think about that. During those times, they still thrived. They were still happy. They just didn't go out and buy everything that they wanted the moment they wanted it. They didn't go out and buy a pizza every time they wanted it. They didn't get a cake every time they wanted it. They didn't get candy every time they wanted it. And even though they didn't indulge in all these extravagances, they were still incredibly happy people. And I think there's some wisdom to be gained from that because back then they didn't have a lot. They didn't overindulge. They didn't have a bunch of money. They didn't have a bunch of possessions. And they were constantly going through difficult times, yet they still managed to be happy. Nowadays, we have so much, there is an overabundance, and we have access to almost anything that we want, yet we're more unhappy than we've ever been. So perhaps we should be looking backwards to how our ancestors, our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents lived, what they went through, and try to gain the wisdom that they had. That's what I'm trying to do. That's the first secret motive. The second secret motive is a lot less heady and a lot less pretentious sounding, but I enjoy doing difficult things, and these challenges that I set for myself, whether they be financial, dietary, or exercise-based, are difficult for me to adhere to, and I get a great feeling when I accomplish something that is a struggle. By walking 1,500 miles in a year, by sticking within a diet, by getting a set amount of work done, by publishing a video that was difficult to get done. By doing hard work and actually overcoming that struggle, I get a tremendous amount of joy out of it. These are a couple of things that I do in my day-to-day life. No spend months, live within a diet, exercise every single day. Simple things that are difficult, but I get a great feeling when I accomplish them. And the third secret motive, I don't mean to sound like a doomer, but I am anticipating some economic hard times in the future, and I would prefer to change my behavior, to change my habits on my own terms, as opposed to being forced to shift them because of an economic downturn. This way, if these downtimes do occur, I'm going to be fairly ready to weather the storm, and I won't encounter culture shock when I realize that I have to cut back my spending on all of these luxuries. Oh no, I can't go get my Starbucks. Oh heck, I can't go to Target and buy that thing I wanted. Geez, I can't order that Amazon. I can't order that or that or that. I'm going to be prepared because I am already living like a monk. I am already living like we are in those times. Some people may look at me and think that's no way to live your life. You ought to be living it up while you can, but I enjoy it. I have found joy in simple living. I have found joy in living below my means, in saving money, in not spending every dime that I have, in not being overindulgent. And changing your relationship with all of this behavior, I think is an incredibly healthy thing. To summarize this entire diatribe, the reason I live frugally, the reason I live on a strict diet, and the reason I exercise every single day is because that is the right decision for me, because I understand my behavioral tendencies, and I know if I start to indulge, I will likely overindulge, so I just avoid situations that might lead to that. Thank you very much for the question. I really appreciate you. And that is going to wrap up. We are jumping to the value for value section because, yes, this is a V for V podcast. What that means, if you get value out of this show, just send that back in whatever way you deem appropriate, whether it be time, talent, or treasure. If you find a portion of this show that would be great as a short, let me know in the comments. If you have a great title for this episode or for a clip of this episode, let me know. Both of those are tremendous value, but we are focusing on the monetary, the treasure value that was sent back. First, we have $5 from Attaboy Brad, and he says, thanks. Brad, thank you very much for the $5 I really do appreciate the support. Next, we have $6.99 Canadian from Greg LG, and he says, please never mention no buy months ever again. My wife sometimes watches these episodes with me. And then we have another $6.99 Canadian from Greg with the exact same message. Greg, thank you very much for the 14 Canadian. I wish I could refund one of these because I am assuming you accidentally hit send twice and sent $14 as opposed to the 7. And I also apologize because I spent a lot of time ranting about a no-spend month. I apologize for not abiding your request. Going forward, I will do my best not to mention no-spend months. Yet I just mentioned one in response to your comment. Thank you very much, Greg. I truly appreciate your support. Next, we have €50 from TechMed Raina Richter. He says, Danke, some more value for even more incredible value, Bandrew. Raina, thank you so much for the €50. That is so generous of you, and I really do appreciate your constant support and your kind words. Incredible value. That means so much to me. So thank you so much for that support, and thank you for watching every single week. It really does mean the world to me, and that goes to every single one of you. If you're watching this, if you're listening to this, thank you so much for spending your time with me. You could be doing anything that you want. You spending your time with me is incredibly generous, and I am grateful, so thank you so much. Next, we have $20 from Christopher James, and he says, wow, thorough review, thank you. Yes, the fan is my new laptop because the mics weren't enough. So much for frugality. I have a relocation strategy. We'll see on the plosives with guests, hoping placement can mitigate some value for you. Thanks again. Chris, thank you very much for the $20, and thank you very much again last week for sending in the video question. I really do appreciate it, and I am thrilled that you got some value out of the response last week. Let me know how it goes with the guests and the plosives. And I know that you altered the placement of the mics to mitigate a bit of the fan noise from your computer. Well done. For anybody listening, if you have fan noise and you want to get rid of the most of it, play the polar pattern of your microphone. That means you place the null area of the mic pointed at the loudest sound source. So if you have a cardioid mic, 180 degrees is going to have the most rejection. Point that at the fan in your computer or whatever that sound source is, and it will reject the most. Thank you again, Chris. I really do appreciate it. And lastly, we have $5 from Rafael Cruz Podcast, and he says, as usual, another amazing release. So pleased to have listened and learned so much. Excellent sound review. Thanks. Raphael, thank you so much for the $5 and thank you for those kind words. I am thrilled that you gained something from last week's episode, that you learned something, and that you enjoyed your time. Again, I appreciate you spending your time watching or listening to this. It really does mean the world. That's going to wrap up for this week's episode. No Ask Bandrews this week. If you have any questions, go send them in. AskBandrew.com, AskBandrew.com, AskBandrew.com. I apologize, my voice is going. I have been recording a lot as I get some clicky clackies on the microphone. Did I shock myself? I don't know. I am off my game because we lost an hour. That is why this episode is coming out later than usual. It's heckin' 5 p.m. already, and I'm not even done filming. Daylight savings can suck a bag of whatever. It stinks. It's stinky. And I got 1 hour less of sleep. Stupid, dude. It's so stupid. I hate it. But that is it. Thank you so much for coming by. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I appreciate you. I love you. I hope you have an amazing Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Next Sunday, I will be back talking at you, with you, about you. See you then. Bye-bye. Whoa, boop.
This has been a Geeks Rising production. Your executive producer is Bandrew Scott. For more information, head over to www.geeksrising.com.